All right, welcome to Chapter 8 of our Excel and Return study. I do have a question to start out with you guys about, and it has to do with things that we endured and learned over the pandemic and what we're going to do with that knowledge when we get fully back to normal. For those of you who weren't here in the live session, we were talking about some vaccine shots before we hit record, and so we're getting closer. But at any rate, the question is this, and then we'll use this kind of the stage the rest of our conversation today. What did you learn that, or what practice did you pick up over the pandemic that you think is going to continue once the world returns to normal?
Exercising at home instead of going to the health club.
Uh-huh.
I kind of figure if I'm not feeling well and that's not, I don't know, more like have the cold or, sneezes and that sort of thing, I definitely will continue to wear a mask in public just out of respect for not spreading those germs.
Mm-hmm. And that won't look so weird.
It won't.
In the future. Kevin, I did have a question on yours. Was that just because of convenience or cost or what?
Well, we've been members of a health club like wherever we lived for the past 25 or 30 years. And that was just our habit to go exercise. And so with the pandemic, initially it was out of safety, right? Mm-hmm. I was coming off heart surgery and Linda was going through chemo, and we did not, when the health club reopened, they were shut down completely for about 4 or 6 weeks. And then when they reopened, we just didn't feel safe going back. And, by the time we were kind of at a point where it may have been safe, we had already figured out a home. I just figured out I got very comfortable exercising at home. It's just better. It's convenient. You avoid the drive back and forth, avoid the money that it costs for membership. It was started with a safety thing and then kind of turned into just, it's a lot more convenient, and I actually exercise more. Because before it was kind of like, I wouldn't exercise at home. I would just go to the health club. It was like one of those habits, right?
Right.
Like I only drink chocolate milk, not vanilla. But I was like locked into that. And now that I exercise at home, I find myself working out, 6 days a week instead of 3 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
It's the trend that people are building home gyms during this. It's a total trend. I mean, that's small gym owners are seeing that because people exactly like Kevin just have figured out a way to do what they were paying lots of money to do outside the home.
Yeah, we had a treadmill already, and then so we did buy a stair climber because Linda prefers a stair climber. Mm-hmm. That's about all we needed because we already had a bench and hand weights and lots of other stuff that we always had. I just never used.
Yeah.
And so that was, I think, for the good.
It's interesting. I had gone over. You talk about the usage of stuff like that you buy. And I was over at Eric Hill's house once, and he's got a rowing machine there. And I saw that and I said, how do you hang clothes on that?
Well, Eric looks like he probably actually uses it.
Yeah, he's pretty faithful in using that. So anyway, what about anyone else? Any practices or things that will probably continue?
Even the simpleness of going to the grocery store, if I plan ahead better, I planned ahead better for what we need during the pandemic. So I only have to go every 1.5 weeks or 2 weeks.
Oh.
There's been times in my life where I've just gone every day to the grocery store because I wouldn't plan ahead.
Sure.
Well, and from that point, I've learned how to order, my Target runs and those types of things online, and then, do through the app and drive up. I don't go into stores as often, and I probably will continue that because it's super convenient.
you also only buy what you need.
Yeah.
You don't have those impulse purchases as much. And that's what I've noticed for
True.
the Target and the Amazon. Yeah, it helps.
Well, the Amazon shopping, I've seen a little more impulse buying at our house. It's like, ooh, look at that. Buy it now? Okay, it'll come tomorrow? Sure. I could use one of them.
Yeah, a lot more cardboard in the recycle bin.
Yeah.
Yes, yes,
And
there
that
is.
raises the risks of the neighborhood pirates and everything like that are stealing packages and stuff like that.
Well, we found out we're not going to get to go back to work. They subleased our building. And so I was really disappointed to hear that. And so my dog is going to still enjoy the benefits of me being home and
Yeah,
that
so
sort
they
of thing.
decided everyone will work remotely permanently.
Yes.
Nice.
And it is very disappointing because they've been telling us all along it'd probably be sometime this summer, like June, July. And we still have all of our personal effects there at the office. So it made my next decision a lot easier. And I'm going to go ahead and get my insurance license and start working with Rich eventually.
Oh.
So
Good.
Oh,
I need to get out and do people.
yeah.
I need to get out of the house. I don't think it's healthy.
I agree with you. I don't know about you, Pastor. You're okay being in here, but to
I'd
personally,
be just fine if I never had to leave my house again. Yeah, I'm a real introvert.
You're liking the virtual. You're liking the virtual outreach, huh?
Actually, no. When it comes to
Yeah.
church work, it's all horrible. I haven't liked it at all. Just is in a personal way. I'm just not a people person. It wears me out to be around lots of people. So.
Total 100% opposite of my personality.
Yeah, I'm Brenda's completely opposite.
I'm a number one woo.
I like to say I'm a functional extrovert. Because when it's time for services or stuff like that, I can do that, but it wears me out. So I come home and give the leftovers to the family, which isn't a whole lot. It's like, Mommy, why is Daddy sleeping? Well, because he needs to rest. Anyway, but speaking of that, there is a lot of stuff in the church that's probably going to continue after we get fully done with the pandemic. These Zoom meetings are probably going to persist, at least in some way. I do like meeting in person more, but I got to tell you, not having to stay all day long in Gretna or not having to drive back at 7:00 at night for a meeting and then returning home afterwards to find the kids already in bed after not seeing them all day. It's been nice to just be done at 9:00 or so and still get to play with the kids or to play with the kids until 7 and then go to the meeting and stay here at the house. We've saved a lot on babysitters this last year because we were engaging three nights a week most of the time. Just a babysitter to come and watch the kids while we were in meetings. So that's been nice. I could kind of wish that would continue. But online services will continue even when we're back to normal. So those are things that'll keep going. It's a question because the Israelites, when they were in captivity in Babylon, a lot of them picked up new practices like fasting and things like that. And when they returned home, Zechariah talks about this in the fourth portion of the in our chapter this week. Zechariah was talking about it, and why did you do those things, and why do you want to keep them? Because the question was, now that the temple is about complete, are we going to continue the fasting that we've done while we were in exile and while it was being built? Are we going to continue that fasting, or are we going to stop it? Like, what's going to change in our practices? And the answer they get back is, well, who have you fasted for? Was it for God or was it for yourself? And so that's the kind of the question that we're going to ask ourselves as we think about our practices that we've picked up over the last while as we've been waiting to return home to normal. Are we going to continue some of them? And if we are, is it for us or is it for God? So that is going to be part of our discussion today. But before we get into that, let's pick up with the first portion of the chapter and returning to the Lord, not only physically, but also spiritually. And so if we could have someone read for us Zechariah 1 through 6.
I'm there.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, a call to return to the Lord. In the 8th month of the 2nd year of Darius, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Zechariah, son of Berechiah, the son of Iddo. The Lord was very angry with your forefathers. Therefore, tell the people, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Return to me, declares the Lord Almighty, and I will return to you, says the Lord Almighty. Do not be like your forefathers to whom the earlier prophets proclaimed, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Turn from your evil ways and your evil practices. But they would not listen or pay attention to me, declares the Lord. Where are your forefathers now? And the prophets, do they live forever? But did not my words and my decrees, which I commanded my servants, the prophets, overtake your forefathers? Then they repented and said, the Lord Almighty has done to us what our ways and practices deserve, just as he determined to do.
Okay.
Was I supposed to go through 6?
No. Yeah, through 6. You got it.
Okay.
Or was it? Yeah, it was through 6.
Mhm.
So the people of God were warned that their ways were not the proper ways, that they were, following other gods, that they were, following the God of Jacob and Isaac and Abraham only through their lips, but they weren't doing it, and it wasn't penetrating into their heart. And so this was the reason that they had to go into exile and return home. That's why they were punished. And so as they were coming back, God wanted not only the temple to be rebuilt, God wanted not only their time, but God wanted their full being back to worship. And it's a good question for us today too. Like, how many times have you come to church just because it's Saturday night or Sunday morning and it's time for worship, and so I'm going to go. But then while you're sitting there, you're thinking of, I don't know, the ball game, or what you're going to do next week, or the shopping on the way home. And so you're there physically, and yet we weren't really present. And so let's kind of talk about that a little bit. And just so you know, I'm not judging you. I will say there have been times I've been leading worship and have not been present.
It is. It's you get into a routine, and anytime you do something routinely, you can't help but do it by rote. You're just going through the motions. And so, yeah, on Sunday morning or Saturday evening, when you're well, this is my worship time. You just go out of habit, and sometimes you do have to force yourself, oh, where is my head? And get back in the moment, because you're going to miss what's there. Sometimes I think that's part of the devil, trying to make us think other things, or gee, I forgot to turn the rice on before I left.
Did I
You're
leave the
human.
iron on?
So
But that-
yeah,
Yeah.
it is hard.
Yeah. I mean, I'll have to admit, when I was on church council and you have council duty, there were probably at least a couple times where, I found myself saying, God, I wish I didn't have to go this morning.
Yeah.
Being selfish.
Absolutely.
If it makes you feel any better, Kevin, I feel like that. It's like, God, I didn't have to go to church today.
Well, and I think it's hard sometimes with our busy lives and everything going on to sometimes slow your head down to totally be present
Yeah.
in things. But, it's a practice. And I think the pandemic's that's one thing that maybe at least I have a lot more alone time, gives you a lot more time to self-reflect and
Yes,
think about stuff.
Sure.
I think it does.
Now, for me, kind of the classic example is the confession and forgiveness, the brief order. So like when things are hectic and busy, that's something that just kind of rolls, and not the ones that we're doing right now, but the old one. And I should have thought of it before I just opened my mouth, so I could kind of, it's like, if we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. But if we confess our sin, God, who is faithful and just, will forgive our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. That whole portion of the service that, I learned by rote when I was a kid and through college, and how many times did I just let that wash over me and not penetrate into my being. And the only time in my life where that really had meaning was when I was in college. And it was my favorite part of the service to hear that corporate confession and the forgiveness that came after it. It was my favorite part. I always felt clean after that. As a college student, feeling clean after what you've done on Saturday night is always a good thing.
Right.
But yeah, it was always real good. But I know so often that stuff like that gets lost because it was either Dell or Brenda that was saying it becomes it just becomes ritualized, and the purpose behind the ritual can get lost.
When we were in, I don't know if it was catechism or confirmation, and I went to LCM back then, and he sort of, when we were being taught the prayers, visualize what you're saying, and that's always stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that visualization, when we say our prayers, that's when I can snap back into where I am.
Right.
Everything else that's been zipping around in my head, I can then focus. And it was just a different teaching that he taught us to visualize what you're saying. And for some reason that was always stuck with me. And I love our prayers.
Yeah.
Just for that, because it will get me back on track in the moment.
It's interesting, Dell, the power of visualizing things. A couple of weeks ago, I was sitting in with the youth, and we were, as part of our devotion together, I taught them centering prayer. And I asked them to visualize, a cross or a candle or, something. And then I walked them through a practice of centering prayer. And then for 5 minutes, I sat in a room full of high school kids and nobody said anything. And we were in that space for 5 minutes. And I wasn't really, because I was watching the clock. And I thought for sure when we got to 3 minutes, I'm going to have to stop this because the kids are going to get antsy. At the 4 minutes, well, they're still going. Maybe we'll do the 5. And then after 5 minutes, I said, okay, guys, let's come back to the present. And someone said, that was 5 minutes. And I asked them, how long has it been since you've just sat quietly for 5 minutes? And they didn't have anything to say because they're always checking TikTok or Instagram or whatever it is. And they just don't have that space anymore. And so the kids, like, they were into it.
Wow.
So that was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
That is.
But it is that visualization that can be so helpful in preparing that space in one's kind of mental landscape. So it worked when you were a kid, Dell, and it still works today.
I didn't have the other distractions that the kids today have.
Yeah.
I had sticks.
Salt on snails,
Yeah.
lipsticks, jacks. Did you have a loop made of metal that you used your stick to twirl down the road?
No, I didn't have that because I was clumsy, as you all will know.
But you can raise. Ow, dang it! I can't. You can raise your arm up. So you got that going for you. That's good.
One thing at a time.
One thing at a time. That's right. Yeah. Are there any other ways that you guys have discovered of, like, when you're just kind of physically present and you're not mentally there? Have you found out any other ways to draw yourself back into worship? Or maybe not even worship. Maybe if you're doing a devotion at home and you're just, you read a chapter or a passage or a verse and you get to the end of it and you say, what was it that I just read? How is it that you draw yourselves back into the presence of God?
I make myself read it again. I mean, seriously, I'm like, for God's sakes, I need to, because I do sometimes just go through the motions and then I'm like, no, stop and slow down. And yeah. So just self-discipline, I guess.
I know, like, when we're listening to your sermons, sometimes, I'll be going along and then you say something and then it takes me on this tangent over here. And it's like, like a minute later, it's like, wait a minute. And I tune back in.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say sometimes during your sermon, I fall asleep.
No, I haven't done that.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, but as I am Mr. Tangent. You guys don't even know how often I just go down tangents during the message. That's why I don't use a manuscript, so I can do that and not lose my place, because I'm trying to find it on the page.
Well, it's some connection that you have with what you said,
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's normal. I find myself doing that too, because all of a sudden you'll think of a certain situation that Pastor's talking about and you went there and then you're trying to.
Yeah. Maybe a little ding every now and then. Ding, come back.
Ding. All right, let's go back.
But it's a good thing to go there too, because then you're actually, making relevant what Pastor's saying to your personal situation. So, I mean,
I think so.
Yeah. So it's not all bad to go on those little tangents once in a while.
Yeah.
We just have to remember to come back.
Be nice.
Right.
Hey, as long as you're not drooling, I don't care what you're doing.
Now,
When I'm looking at you and you're like this, and you've got.
I don't hardly ever see people falling asleep at church anymore. When I was growing up, we had the little line down to my dad to nudge him to wake him up when he was nodding off. And I remember that more back in the day.
Well, we have older members that fall asleep regularly. or maybe they're just closing their eyes to concentrate.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah, let's go with that. But we can also go on. So, yeah, but sometimes there are those things in lives that kind of jar us and snap us back into maybe more awareness. Like something will happen, almost like when you're driving your car and you start to nod off, and all of a sudden you're on the rumble bars.
Yeah.
in your what? It's okay. I feel like sometimes our spiritual lives are like that. You know, we can just get into a routine and kind of fall asleep at the wheel, and then something happens, and it brings us back to the present. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge. Well, we need to move on to the second part of our conversation today, which we really started with that question of what are the things that we're going to maybe retain from the pandemic into normal society. And we're going to skip over the 8 visions that the author talked about in Zechariah, and we're going to go to number 4, fasting or justice. And this is Zechariah 7:1-14. So if anybody could read that for us as we skip ahead.
I gotta say, visions are not a strength of mine.
They're not?
No, I gotta read people's interpretation of it usually.
Yeah.
Well, and not everyone's Joseph.
Yeah. I'm
Not
with you,
everyone's
Sherry.
Oh, I tell you what, I had a disturbing dream the other night, and I was trying really hard to interpret what that meant. But it so bothered me that it stuck with me all day long, and that usually doesn't happen. But it was yesterday that happened, and it was awful.
Did you figure it out yet?
No. I think it may have had something to do with the entertainment that I was listening to, the book I was listening to, and some stuff that was just going on over the last couple of months at service. But they got intertwined, I think, in my brain. I don't know what it was doing, but it was just awful. And you know, sometimes you just wake up and you're glad, oh, I'm so glad that was a dream.
Yeah.
But then but for the first time in my life yesterday, it's like, what does that dream say about me? That I even had a dream like that. So it was weird. It was not enjoyable. All right, but fasting or justice, Zechariah 7:1-14. Anybody?
I can read.
Thank you.
In the 4th year of King Darius, the word of the Lord came to Zechariah on the 4th day of the 9th month, which is Chislev. Now the people of Bethel had sent Sherezer and Regem Malek and their men to entreat the favor of the Lord and to ask the priests of the house of the Lord of hosts and the prophets, should I mourn and practice abstinence in the 5th month as I have done for so many years? Then the word of the Lord of hosts came to me. Say to all the people of the land and the priests, when you've fasted and lamented in the 5th month and in the 7th for these 70 years, was it for me that you fasted? And when you eat and when you drink, do you eat and drink only for yourselves? Were not these the words that the Lord proclaimed by the former prophets when Jerusalem was inhabited and in prosperity along with the towns around it? And when the Negeb and the Shephelah were inhabited, the word of the Lord came to Zechariah, saying, thus says the Lord of hosts, render true judgments, show kindness and mercy to one another. Do not oppress the widow, the orphan, the alien, or the poor, and do not devise evil in your hearts against one another. But they refused to listen and turned a stubborn shoulder and stopped their ears in order not to hear. They made their hearts adamant in order not to hear the law and the words that the Lord of hosts had sent by his Spirit through the former prophets. Therefore, great wrath came from the Lord of hosts. Just as when I called, they would not hear. So when they called, I would not hear, says the Lord of hosts. And I scattered them with a whirlwind among all the nations that they had not known. Thus the land they left was desolate, so that no one went to and fro, and a pleasant land was made desolate.
All right, thank you, Sherry. So we see what the people were doing. We saw God's judgment on them for that. We saw what the people were doing, what they thought was for God. We saw what God really wanted them to do, which they wouldn't do. And then there was the punishment. Yeah, that's kind of how the progression in that works. And so we're coming off of the punishment phase of this is they're returning home. But these practices that they picked up, the fasting and all of this stuff, and the even during the construction of the temple, the funds that were given to that, were they supposed to continue all of that now that the temple was nearing completion? Should they continue to suffer so that the temple could be built, or now that the temple's done being built, do they still have to suffer for the work of whatever the church was doing? I shouldn't say the church at that time, but for whatever the temple was doing. And so that was the question that was posed. And then the response that they get in this portion from Zechariah basically says, what is it that God wants? What did God want through the fasting, right? What did God want through the giving to the temple? Right? What did God want through the pandemic for us? And so what were these things? Let's talk about it. What did God want of you over the last year? Now and I'll phrase this a little more, or I'll place it a little more. We did certain things, right? We did restrict how many could come to service. We stopped meeting publicly altogether for a while. We didn't practice the sacraments like we had been doing or like we normally do. These were the practices that came to us through the pandemic. Why did we do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably one thing that God wanted was for all of us to help each other to get through this.
Yeah.
To do, a different situation created new ways, different ways to help each other.
Yeah, they had help maps, like if you needed help on the neighborhood app, there were people who were willing to go grocery shopping for others and leave the groceries on their doorstep or nearby so that they could get them. So there was a lot more, in my opinion. I did see people trying to reach out and help others that couldn't help themselves. So that was different. It reminded me of the 9/11 timeframe that we were in years ago.
Except it lasted longer.
It did.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the nice things about the response to the pandemic, was it was more than a couple of months. That kind of mentality of caring and loving your neighbor is still going to a large degree.
I mean, I think I still, I guess it bothers me, but I think these crises that occur, they're opportunities to work together. And I mean, I think God, it was a situation where, we could have all kind of put aside a lot of things we were, disagreeing on and come together with the find common ground to come together and fight the pandemic. And that didn't happen, unfortunately.
No. Unfortunately, it didn't.
So it was a lost opportunity.
I do think there's been a lot, I mean, at least I've noticed and been more aware locally of all the, people in need for various reasons during this time. But there's so many opportunities to help and give and whatever that I think I've become more aware of during this pandemic. And I, think that's a good thing, and have, spent time, and some energies with, supporting some of these during this time.
For sure.
With Rich's mom being in Brookstone in December and January, she was there for 2 full months, rehabbing after she had fallen. And when we got her out, there was such a huge appreciation for being able to be with her physically instead of having, we got to see her at a window. We'd be outside and she was inside, and they allowed us to call a phone so that we could hear her voice and she could hear us. But it was so depressing for her. And we've made it a point now that she's out, and we're still waiting to figure out what the next steps are. But we go and visit her much more frequently because she needs that. She needs that one-on-one. She needs her family around her. And had COVID not happened, I don't think any of us would have been as cognizant of it, because it did affect our family just in a different way.
I was talking about rumble bars a little bit ago, Dell, and kind of shaking us out of complacency or falling asleep at the wheel. I think the pandemic did that for some relationships. So it's, mom, we can't go see mom for a couple of months because she's in rehab. That's horrible. Well, that's hitting the rumble bars, and let's make sure that we're more present with her. Brenda, I know, is the same thing with your mom before she passed.
Oh.
It's just,
it
was a really horrible year last year for people in those situations. With a huge rumble bar. I would submit, though, that the purpose behind, in the Second Temple period when that was being built, the purpose behind the fasting and the giving was to pull people closer to God. And the sharing of resources and the sacrifice that people were making was an expression of love for God through the neighbors. And I would say the same thing exists today. And that the suffering that we endured through the pandemic and the restrictions wasn't for us. It wasn't about our rights and whether or not we have to wear a mask or shouldn't have to wear a mask, but was for the love of the neighbor. And I think my intent anyway, as a pastor of the church during that time, was to try to keep that in people's minds as we did make policy, that there's the things that we would like to do, right? Because I've really not liked how we had to worship last year, because it's not what we're used to. But the root of why we do things is for the love of God. And the way we experience God in the world most readily is through our neighbors. And so we can't say we love God if we're not loving our neighbors. And Jesus showed us the kind of love that we are to have. And if we're not doing sacrificial love, then we're loving ourselves, and the fasting is not for us. No, excuse me, the fasting isn't for God. The fasting at that point becomes for us. And so this, when I was reading the chapter for this week and thinking about our conversation today, for me, there was a lot of resonance with what we've endured over the past year. What were this, just thinking of the spiritual practices that came up during the pandemic, and what were we insisting on, and what is God trying to tell us? And to be sure that my interpretation of this is by no means a consensus interpretation. There's plenty of other churches that did not have that viewpoint. Well, plenty of people in our church that didn't have that viewpoint. And we recognize that. But that's what it was. Any comments or thoughts?
Well, as humans, we're still very imperfect.
Yeah.
Not very different than back in those days.
Right. And it's one of the blessings of marriage, Kevin, that I'm made aware of my imperfection on a daily basis.
Yeah, what is this, 5,000 years, well, whatever, 5,000 years. Unfortunately, we haven't made much progress.
No.
Well, I think too, what we're talking about today is kind of what you remind us of in Lent, Pastor, is, if you're giving up something for Lent or doing that, are you doing it to, lose a few pounds, or are you doing it because you really want to get closer to God by understanding what Jesus went through for us, kind of a deal. So yeah, it helps to center yourself on why you're doing things sometimes.
It also makes me feel a little better, though, Brenda, too, knowing that the difficulties that we've been facing and these questions that we've been struggling with are the very same questions that the Hebrews were struggling with when they were coming out of exile, right? And as they were getting back into Jerusalem and thinking about their practices. And, the question that God asked them is the same question that God asks us today. Why are you doing this?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I was listening to some podcasts, and they're talking about being in alignment. And it's kind of the same thing. I mean, when your actions and your feelings don't really match, I think we know when you kind of know when you're out of alignment, right? You're doing something that you don't enjoy, you're doing something that annoys you, or and just being able to recognize that and step back and say, how do I get back in alignment? Why am I out of alignment? Is it because I'm doing the wrong thing, or is it because I'm being selfish, and trying to get back in alignment? So, we're doing the right thing for the right reason.
Yeah, it was the big question the Israelites had when they were coming back. How did we get out of alignment? And some of the results they came up with Ezra and Nehemiah weren't the most loving, but it was, certainly a struggle. And we don't have to feel bad when we struggle with that.
Yeah.
Because it's part of our nature, and it's something that we all will struggle with at some point in our lives, just like the Hebrews. We have the benefit of knowing that we have a faithful God that doesn't abandon us when we're struggling, and because we have the witness of God for the people in Egypt, and we have the witness for God for the people in exile. We have the witness of God through Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago, and we have the witness of God through all the time of the martyrs and all the struggles that the church has gone through in the Reformation, and even today as we come home from pandemic. And I have to think that 500, 1,000 years from now, when people are going through some crisis, maybe it's whether or not we should fully merge with computer intelligences, or we should remain, flesh and blood. And the church is going through a conflict of, should we live forever on a computer landscape, or should we allow our bodies to die like we have in days past? That maybe they'll look back, well, the church struggled with what God was wanting them to do back in 21 during the pandemic, and they were coming home from that. And so I like to think that what we're doing today will be referenced some other time as just one more sign of the faithfulness of God for God's people. But we gotta be faithful, and we gotta ask that question: why? Why are you doing what you're doing? So, any final thoughts as we end our time today? It's 10 o'clock, or it's it's 11 o'clock. Well, thank you all for some good conversation today, especially when a couple of us don't feel terribly well because of the shots and everything. But maybe it's because some others of us feel pretty good getting rested on vacation and getting back in the swing of things. So next week we'll pick up with a family feud, and this will be Esther. And this is an interesting book. Have you guys spent much time with Esther?
No.
Okay, it's pretty interesting. So we'll take a look at that, and we'll catch you guys either tonight, tomorrow, or sometime next week.
Sounds great.
Until then, God's blessing.
Have a good Saturday.
And if y'all want to hang around for just a little bit to do some conversation that isn't recorded, we can do that too. But let me stop the recording now. Thank you all for joining us today. Bye-bye.